What's up, everyone? Welcome to Fan Sports New York Varsity. I'm your host, Frank Langella, joined by my co-host, Marcilio Langella. And Mars, this is our week 2 for Section 1AA preview show. We're going to talk about some of the matchups and pick the games this weekend. But I want to welcome you to the show, Mars. How you doing?
It's doing well, man. The fact that we're in week 2 already is it's pretty crazy. I mean, last week had a lot of great games, a lot of fun matchups, and I'm just looking forward to see what week 2 brings us.
Absolutely. And I want to welcome our fans. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And just a reminder, if you do like this content, please give a thumbs up and subscribe for future content. Also really helps our channel. So please do so if you can. And this show, again, what we're going to be doing, we're going to talk about the games on slate. We'll break down some of the top matchups. And then at the end, we're going to pick all the games. So we will talk about all the matchups eventually at the end. But before we get started, I mentioned about giving a thumbs up and subscribing, but you can also get access to our content on our website at famsportsny.com. And if you would like to donate to our cause, again, we are a grassroots group. We don't do paid subscriptions. All our money comes from donations. So we really do appreciate if you can donate to us. You can get access to our Patreon in the description below, as well as our website. But Mars, now that is finished, let's talk about the games on slate for this weekend. Carmel 1-0 at Yonkers Forest. That is 2-0. That is a league game. Scarsdale at Ossining is a league game. John J. East Fishkill at Marmaroneck is a league game. White Plains at Suffern is a non-league game. Mount Vernon at RCK is a league game. Arlington at North Rockland is a league game. And Neuro at Yonkers Brave, which is also a league game. So those are the games on slate. Let's get into some of the action, Mark, some of the top matchups. Let's start with Carmel 1-0 at Yonkers Forest. That is 2-0. Yonkers Forest is 1-0 in league play. Carmel has not played a league game yet. Carmel last week won versus Neuro. Forest won versus RCK. And let's start with Carmel, Mars. I thought they had a statement win last week against Rochelle. They have a bunch of inexperienced players. They do have a mix of some of the players that were on that state team, but a lot of new faces that had to come in important roles. And I thought, you know what, for a team that had to replace a lot of starters, I thought it was a pretty impressive victory last week. And see how they continue going this one. I always worry about teams with a lot of new faces, a lot of inexperience. After a big victory, how do they respond the following week, right? Do they kind of rest on their laurels, or do they come extra motivated? Is always going to be big. Offensively, I think you're going to see a very steady dose of the run game, Mars. They're going to see this offensive line, I believe, can move bodies on the line of scrimmage. They did so last week. I think they try to rely on them again this time around. I mean, we saw Worlou last week, 133 yards, 2 touchdowns as a sophomore. Rosafort, he had 3 rushing touchdowns last week. Heavy dose on the run game, and I'm expecting to see heavy sets, using their strength, try to out-leverage the defense, and then go play action off of that with their quarterback Gay to guys like Santiago, Neres. I mean, last week, Mars, they didn't pass the ball in the second half. And I think that's kind of been the formula. Heavy run, play action, see if you can man up with them offensively. Defensively, I thought the unit as a whole was really strong last week, but they did have some couple blown coverages that led to some touchdowns and led to some points. Yonkers Sports has speed, Mars, and these DBs are going to need to be disciplined. And I think what's going to be really important is this Carmel defensive line. They need to be strong up front. They do, Yonkers Sports, they'll mix in 20 personnel, they'll mix in 10 personnel, bring in 2x2, bring in trips. So it's going to be tempo. Can this defense get aligned correctly? Can they be disciplined? Is going to be extremely important for them. And we talked about what can help a secondary, Mars? Defensive line and getting pressure up front, right? We know Carmel's style is being aggressive. They're probably going to be, coming after the team. So we're going to see, right? Can they hold up in the secondary? Can this front, if they don't send people, can they get to the quarterback? Is going to be really interesting. Mars, what are your thoughts on Carmel?
Yeah, Carmel last week made a lot of big plays, and I don't think a lot of people expected that Carmel would do what they did against New Rochelle. I think a lot more people thought it was gonna be a closer game. I thought it was gonna be a closer game, but Carmel, like you said, made a statement win. They said, hey, people think we dropped off since the state title win, but they haven't. Right, they're right back to where they were before last season, and they're just rocking it right now. I think from the offensive perspective, they have a lot of young guys on this team. They have a lot of guys who they have guys who did contribute to the state title win, but they also have guys who are younger dudes that are stepping into new roles. So I really think it's impressive to see how Carmel has been playing, and like you said, the rush attack is going to be the priority. Can they establish the run to then open up the pass, right? That's always going to be Carmel's ideology, as well as the fact that they're going to try to out-leverage you or outmaneuver you to get the advantage, especially when it comes more blockers against defenders, right? And I think Coach K's done a great job of doing that with scheming, but obviously the kids have just stepped it up, right? I think they did a great job last week, and it's going to be interesting to see how they do that this coming week. Defensively, I think, like you said, it was very well done, very well coached, very well executed by the players. The issue was that there were some blown coverages, which you obviously don't want to see against anybody. Even by that point in time, the game was well over, but at the end of the point, it was like you don't want to see that. You don't want to see your starters lose those easy coverages that just mental lapses that you've done before, right? And I think that's the thing. It's like it's not like they can't do it, right? They've shown they could. And it's almost like sometimes you just want them to do it consistently more often. So I think they do have a bounce back this week, but it's going to be a question to see whether this front will make some pressure, right, and cause some turnovers, and obviously will this secondary be consistent, right? Do what the coaching has set for them, as well as them step up like they did in most of the game last week, right? They just need to continue be consistent, and I think they'll be fine.
Let's talk about Yonkers Forest, Mars. They're 2-0 for the first time since the program started. And offensively, they run this two-quarterback system, and both quarterbacks have made plays for them the first 2 weeks. Alvin Martinez is kind of that 200-plus-pound quarterback who runs like a fullback. And, he had a couple rushing touchdowns last week. Olkers, the other quarterback, had 2 passing touchdowns, a little bit more of the shiftier guy. Both of them still throw the football, right? So they don't run different plays with them, but they both have different kind of traits and both complement each other pretty well. But we got to talk about their wide receiver, kind of their number one target, Aquino. 7 receptions, 209 yards, and 2 touchdowns last week, Mars. He is a burner, and he really can burn you deep. They kind of either go short or go deep. And this guy is someone who's hit big plays now, first 2 weeks of the year. People haven't really been able to stop his go routes or his stop and goes or kind of his sluggos. This guy's a burner, and defenses have to be aware of him, and they have to respect his speed. So the real thing is they're going to test these Carmel defensive backs and see if they're disciplined, see if they're staring into the backfield that they can hit them deep, right? But it starts with the offensive line to me. I thought they played well last week, led by guys like Powell. They're going to have to try to hold up front, and they're going to have to recognize different, whether it's stunts or blitzes that they bring Carmel if they bring them, right? So this offensive line is going to have to step up, whether it's run blocking or pass blocking. They're going to have to communicate with each other. Defensively, the ability to slow down this rush attack is going to be huge, Mars. Obviously, you want to give the offense more possessions. They like to go with tempo. They like to go no huddle. Stevens last week had a sack. Gilliard had a sack. Carl Samuels had an INT. They're going to need these kind of players to step up and make some big plays when probably people are not going to think that they can, right? So it's going to be important. Yonkers Force has some size and speed to them. So, again, let's see how they match up. Mars, what are your thoughts on Yonkers Force?
Yeah, Yonkers Force offensively, I think, has some really interesting components. I think they have some skill players that can really hurt you in space. The fact that they have this 2-quarterback system, a power runner and more of a shifty runner is actually really interesting, and it's efficient. They've been doing pretty well. I think that it will be a test to see, how does the Carmel secondary react to the skill players they have? And the offensive line has been playing well, but they will be tested. I think that is a guarantee because Carmel does have a very good front. Defensively for Yonkers Forest, I think the biggest question is going to be, can you slow down this rush attack? Force Carmel to have to sit in the pocket and throw, right? Not let them get outside. You got to play good. You have to play smart, contain, force everything inside, but really try to slow down this run. That's going to be the big thing that Yonkers has to do.
Yeah, my matchup to watch, Marcel, I'm looking at these Yonkers Force wide receivers versus the Carmel DBs. I think that is a really intriguing matchup and one that could really dictate this game. Let's go to the next matchup, Mars. Scarsdale 1-0 at Ossining, who's 1-1 last week. Scarsdale won versus White Plains. Ossining lost at Marmaroneck. When you look historically, Scarsdale's 2-1 versus Ossining, but the last time they played was in 2019, a couple years, where they won 43-20. And let's start with Scarsdale. This is another team with a lot of new faces, Mars. They win versus White Plains. And offensively, I got to say, they were very strong. They were led by their quarterback, Kobe Baldwin. He had 176 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. They have multiple options in this rush attack, but obviously Kobe is the one who really leads this. But they have guys like Noah Chappelle, who was a tight end last year, who's at the running back spot now, Campbell Killian, Camden Mattles, excuse me. And I've been really impressed. They have multiple guys who kind of stepped up and hit some big plays for them last week. And this offensive line, not very big, Mars, but they move pretty well. And they run that option. So, you have to have linemen who can move, right? That's going to be, you got to be able to down block, you got to be able to pull, you got to be able to, again, block at the second level. And these linemen have done a pretty solid job last week. So we're going to see if that can continue. But the question I'm going to have is, can they hit some of these, play action passes? I do think they can get some chunk plays. I do think that they're going to try to attack the edge of Ossining because they got the athletes that have the speed that they can hit those chunk plays, right? So play action, making sure that you don't make those poor decisions on some of the option stuff is going to be huge for them. I do think if they can be smart with the football, control time, possession, this is going to be a game that I think with these two rush offenses, it could be a fast game. Let's just say that. Defensively, last week I thought they gave up some big plays in the passing game, whether it was a blown coverage or they just too much space between the wide receiver and DB, or just not making a tackle in space, right? Just too many big plays in the passing game. And I do think Baldwin, again, he's a really impressive player to me because he plays both ways at the quarterback spot. Last week he had 6 tackles. Killian had an INT for a touchdown, which was huge for that team last week. This week, they're going up against a physical rush attack and heavy play action as well. So they got to be disciplined in coverage off of the play action. The eye discipline's got to be huge. And they got to handle this wing T physical offense with a lot of quarterback running, right? So that's going to be huge for them. Scarsdale needs to be aggressive. I do think that they need to, again, not very big, right? So they might have to bring some pressure. And I'm talking run pressure, not really pass pressure, to try to create some negative plays. Mars, what are your thoughts on Scarsdale?
Yeah, when you look at Scarsdale, I thought that they did a pretty good job with, Kobe Baldwin is a very athletic quarterback, and I think that he had a great job last week, and I think the offensive line really set it up where, he's going to have a lot of opportunities. So I think that it's going to open up not just the run, but the play action is going to really open up, especially if they can establish the run here. Defensively, I think, I agree with you. I think the secondary was a little too undisciplined, and I think that they really need to shore up the secondary. But the X factor for me is going to be the front seven. I mean, you're playing against a really run-heavy style of offense against Ossining, and I think if the front seven can slow it up, then you're going to make some plays. And then I think it's like you said, it's going to be probably the shortest game we probably have ever seen. But if you'll get more opportunities on your side, and you can control the pace of this game.
Yeah, and when I look at Ossining, Mars, offensively, last week was a struggle to score points, and I do think they need to bounce back. And it starts at the quarterback, Bino, who is a shifty, and he is a spark plug for this offensive attack. Play action pass could be huge. I mentioned Scarsdale gave up some big plays in the passing game. They have to try to utilize some of the pass attack, especially off of play action, I think will be big. And if they can hit some big chunk plays off the pass attack, it'll open up the run lanes, right? So it'll kind of keep the defense honest, which is going to be big. They also have a couple guys that they rely on running the balls, guys like Stella, LaFaro, Jean-Pierre. I mean, if they can hit 3 or 4 big pass plays, Mars, I think Ossining will be in pretty good shape, because it'll keep that defense honest, allow them to run the football. Defensively, it's option football, right? I mean, the number one priority has got to be stopping Baldwin. You got to force this team, you got to force their fullbacks to kill you or their H-backs to kill you. They cannot let the quarterback and Baldwin kill them, right? Because we know he's got to be top priority number one. Force everybody else and try to funnel everything inside the tackle box, right? Because Scarsdale did a good job of getting out on the edge. They cannot afford to do that, or it's going to be a long day for Ossining. Mars, what are your thoughts on them?
When it comes to Ossining, I think that, I agree with you. I think having some passes to open up the runs, it would be a smart move. I think, obviously you want to try to expand on what you can do offensively so that defenses don't know what's going to come next, right? Obviously, we know Ossining is a run-heavy team, but I'm pretty sure everyone knows that that's going to be the game plan, to try to stop the run. But I think if you could establish some passes, that's going to really make a defensive coordinator's mind scramble, because you don't know what it's going to come next. But defensively, and I agree with you, you got to win the early downs, control the pace of the game, and really try to force Scarsdale to have to do something that they don't want to do, which is pass. You want them to try to ease up, try to control the pace of this game, give it back to your offense, and then you control the clock. Like I said, this game's gonna be fast, but you want to have the most possession of the time. You want the possession of the ball in your hands majority of this game.
Let's go to the next game. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to say matchup. My matchup of this week for this game these Scarsdale running backs, I do think if Ossining bails out to stop Baldwin, these other running backs will have an opportunity to make some big plays. And I'm looking at them versus this Ossining linebacking crew. It's going to have to be very disciplined. Again, playing against the option, you got to know your keys. You got to attack the right people. Let's go to the next matchup this time now. And that is White Plains, who's 0-1 at Suffern, who is also 0-1. This is a non-league game. And White Plains lost last week to Scarsdale. Suffern lost to Arlington. Historically, White Plains is 4-2 versus Suffern, but Suffern has won 2 straight, including last time they played was in 2016. So it's been a while. But let's start with White Plains. Offensively, Mars, we know their style, right? They are tempo, spread, speed, and you saw it. You saw it live last week on display. Their quarterback Mendez, he had a couple passing touchdowns, a mix of some deep shots, some quick game, and some screens that were pretty efficient. I like what I saw, especially in that, the pass attack that I was talking about. And I'm expecting to see them with a similar formula this week, but the offensive line needs to hold up against a strong front in Suffern. And they're going to have to limit turnovers. Turnovers is going to be another huge thing for them because they're a tempo team, right? So, they're like a fast break in basketball where if you get a turnover, it really hurts you, right? Because it ruins the tempo. Obviously, everyone says turnovers hurt, right? But it ruins your tempo. You're giving another spread team the ball in Suffern, and you want to control the tempo of this game, right? So that's going to be huge to make sure the ball is possessed in your hands. And punts are not the worst thing, right? Just don't force things. Force things are where things are going to be. They give up a defensive they threw a turnover that ended up being points for the defense last week, and they were huge. I mean, turnovers are going to be extremely important. Defensively, it was a bit of a struggle last week. I mean, stopping the run was a struggle. They gave up some big chunk plays, especially out on the edge, a couple of really long runs. I'm expecting to see Suffern to try to run downhill. And I'm looking at the front seven. They need to step up big time, especially because Suffern has some stud running backs, especially dorsally. And I do think that you're going to see some heavy sets, even some wildcat sets, and they're going to try to run right at you. So how does White Plains adjust to that? The front seven is going to have to step up. Mars, what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the offense of White Plains is very explosive. It could be, obviously crazy with this high speed, high tempo style of offense. But I agree with you. If you're going to be high tempo, you need to be efficient, and I think that's going to be, the big, goal that White Plains has is be as efficient as possible, and you will be able to move the ball up and down the field. And I think Mendez did a great job scoring several touchdowns. But the offensive line will be tested this week, and I think it's going to be up to them to really set the tone. Right? I think setting the tone this week by controlling the line of scrimmage, opening up some time for your quarterback to make some plays, they're going to be the ones that set this, that can change this game. And defensively, I think it's just about being efficient. The front needs to be smart, needs to be big, control the line of scrimmage, and don't allow the big plays to kill you there.
Yeah. Let's go to the other side. Suffern. And when I look at Suffern, they had a very tough week. Again, their game got moved to this past Monday, and they had to now, instead of being a home game, they had to go to Arlington. Some tough circumstances. And when I look at offensively, you're going to see a mix of the spread. You're going to see some heavy wildcat looks. You'll see some option stuff, some direct snap stuff out of that wildcat. And I do think this week they're definitely going to rely on the run game more and running the ball with Dorselli, Kelly, kind of running outside with Joseph. They need to control the time of possession because, like we talked about with White Plains, they're a high-tempo offense. If you keep the ball out of their hands, that actually benefits your defense as well, right? So you controlling the game, you controlling the time possession will be huge, and it'll keep them. When they're sitting on the sideline, it's hard to get to in tempo, right? So that's going to be a big thing. But one thing that has to change from Monday, they had about 5 or 6 muff snaps, right? And whether it's snaps over the head or snaps being dropped or whatever it is, that has to be figured out ASAP. That absolutely killed them versus Arlington. I felt like the game was closer than what the score was, but those muff snaps were absolute drive killers for Suffern, and they have to resolve that ASAP, or they're going to struggle again. Defensively, I thought they had moments last week versus Arlington. Listen, it was some big plays in the run game that they gave up, especially quarterback runs. And so this week around, it's going to be a little bit different attack, right? White Plains doesn't come as many heavy looks as Arlington does, but they're going to throw the ball, and they want to get their stars in space, guys like Graham and stuff. So you got to be able to tackle in space. You got to be able to cover. And I thought they did a pretty solid job covering last week. or this past Monday. And again, you're going to have to do that again. Getting pressure up front is going to be big. It'll help your secondary out a lot, but they have some skill secondary guys that can make plays, guys like Harris and Snell versus some of these wide receivers. Mars, what are your thoughts on Suffern?
Yeah, when I'm looking at Suffern, I think obviously, it was a tough game in tough circumstances, as you mentioned, against Arlington. And I think that they have a lot of different ways that they could attack you in the way that their scheme is run. But I do agree with you. They're going to run the high tempo. They're going to try to be, and in my opinion, they need to be as efficient as possible. I think that if they can control the run game, it's really going to make the tone or the pacing of this game in favor for Suffern. But I think the little mistakes are kind of added up last week, and I think that's going to be the issue that they have to fix the most. Make sure they don't keep making these mistakes. Be efficient. I think they'll be okay. And defensively, I think they're going to have the size advantage. I think they're going to have the ability to cause some disruptions up front and set the edge and make sure that they can contain the skill players that White Plains has. I think that if they could do that, it does set them up for success.
My matchup to watch for this, I'm looking at these White Plains wide receivers versus the Suffern DBs. Two very talented groups going at it. Definitely my matchup to watch. Let's go to the next game, Mars. Arlington, 1-1 at North Rockland, who's 1-1. Both of them won a league game. This is a league game. Arlington won this past Monday versus Suffern. North Rockland won versus Mount Vernon. When we look historically, Arlington is 8-4 versus North Rockland. They have won 7 straight versus North Rockland, including a win last year where they won 31-6. Let's start with Arlington. I thought this past Monday was a big victory for them. They kind of made a statement in their own. I know on Monday, not a lot of people talk about Monday games, but I thought it was a pretty big statement they made. And offensively, they started off a little bit slow, but what I liked is the emphasis, Mars. They emphasize running behind their big offensive line, bringing in their tight end McGann, again, running behind Coverly or having Coverly pull, and they ran the ball with Lynch and Chaffee, which, again, they were kind of chipping away. But what really sparked this offense was their quarterback, Rosigno. And I'm not talking about throwing the ball. I'm talking about Rosigno running the ball. He had a huge run, resulting in a touchdown. He had a couple big-time plays that really sparked this offense. And this offensive line did a really strong job, and the running backs ran hard. It was a strong, efficient rush attack. And again, that opens things up for kind of that RPO stuff and kind of the quick game offensive stuff. But I do think that is the formula. That is a winning formula for them, which will set up that pass plays, right? But what I also liked, Rosigno didn't force stuff, right? He didn't force stuff versus Suffern. He took what the defense gave him. If his first read wasn't there, now we'd love for him to go through a progression. But hey, he's like, if my reads are not there, what can I do? I can run, right? And he's one of the better athletes, right? And he just took off and ran. And those were, to me, progress, right? And to me, also another thing, Rosigno has become one hell of a special teamer, man. He is a tremendous kicker and punter, and that's also a weapon. But looking at defensively, another thing that I liked, they prevented big plays, especially in the passing game. Now, there were times that guys were open, but they generated enough pressure that the quarterback could not complete it. And I do think that was the big difference from week 0 to week 1, is preventing those big pass plays. The defense swarmed to the ball, especially on the edge, and tackled well in space in the run game. And I do think, again, you're going to see some similar spread and tempo out of North Rockland. But the big thing is, can they get lined up correctly? Don't get out leveraged based on your alignment. And I do think McGann had a tremendous game last week at the defensive line spot. He can cause a havoc out there. And I do think he has an opportunity to do that again this week. Mars, what are your thoughts on Arlington?
Yeah, Arlington did have a pretty big win, and I think they also did make a statement as well. I think the biggest thing that I'm looking at when it comes to Arlington is their size of their line is going to give them the advantage. I think they have basically one of the biggest lines, and I think one AA, and I think that they are going to use that to their advantage. They should be able to run people over and just move bodies left and right, but you do have to give a lot of props to Rosigno. And I said this last week. I didn't think that Arlington was going to make as many mistakes, especially Rosigno not is making as many mistakes early on, and I thought he was going to have a more efficient game. That's why I had picked Arlington, and obviously was right. I think Arlington has the ability to make a lot of plays because they have weapons, and more importantly, their offensive line is just massive and very efficient. Defensively, obviously, they're going to have to stop the big plays, right? The offensive, the passing, the defensive passing game needs to be top notch, and I think they have to use their front the front seven, their size advantage to their benefit. Try to use to control the line of scrimmage, keep contained, and stop any sort of outside run, because we will try to see that with North Rockland.
You want to go to North Rockland offensively, Mars? I thought last week they started off a bit slow. They had 7 points at the half, but definitely picked up in the second half of the game. And that quarterback Italiano had a rushing touchdown and passing touchdown last week. Ethan Farrar had a receiving touchdown. We know about Greg Becker, who can be really valuable to them as a receiver, and as a guy who could take jet sweeps. And Freddie Vasquez, who also 56 yards rushing and a touchdown. But again, how do you block the big front? And guys like McGann on Arlington is going to be huge. I think they're going to have to use trips. They're going to have to shift guys around and try to get that, to get opportunity in space with their numbers, right? They like to spread you out and try to win that way. But listen, how are they going to handle Arlington? Like the blitz. I saw it now for a couple weeks internally. They like to bring linebackers at times, bringing them externally. How do they handle it? They got to know where the hot reads are. They got to, recognize up front where the blitzes are coming, and make sure they take away the top priorities. This is going to be really important. They're going to have to be smart. They're going to have to use their tempo and use their numbers to kind of create some space, because size-wise, they're going to be, which is crazy for a North Rockland team, right? They're going to be undersized, right? So that's just the way things are with Arlington right now. They have some big boys. Defensively, number one is stopping the run, right? You know that Arlington, they saw success last week. I would imagine coming around this, they're bringing in a tight end. They're bringing in two backs. They're probably bringing in two tight ends, right? They'll give you 22 looks. Right, and they're going to try to run it right at you and run it off tackle where they're pulling some linemen. Some of those big boys can move, and these running backs run hard. So you need to swarm to the ball, and you need to catch them early, right? If you're getting, if you're making first contact with these backs 4 yards up the field, they are going to hammer you, because these backs run hard. You have to catch them early, and that to me is making sure these linebackers make the correct reads, shoot gaps when they see it. And so I'm looking at a guy like Hernandez, who had a fumble recovery for a touchdown last week. I'm expecting to see a lot of loaded boxes, right? But another big thing to me, they have to have a guy on the quarterback every single time he is in gun, right? They have to have somebody on Resigno. Resigno killed Suffern last week on runs because at times they didn't have someone responsible for him, right? So that's going to be huge this week. Mars, what are your thoughts on North Rockland?
Yeah, I think obviously when you look at North Rockland, I do agree. They started slow. They definitely played better as the game went on. And obviously the big thing that, in my opinion, is going to be the really toughest thing for North Rockland is going to be their offensive line is going to get tested by the size and strength of Arlington's front. Right? I think they're going to be the ones that dictate the game. Right? I think if North Rockland has the ability to at least push around some bodies, and like you said, it's really rare to see or hear that North Rockland does not have a size advantage against a team, right? And I think that Arlington definitely has that advantage. So it's going to be a question about whether or not the offensive line of North Rockland will be able to move Arlington's front at all, right? And I think defensively, I agree. Stop the run, and I think even the run from Resigno is going to be really important for them to try to slow up and try to force Resigno to be in tough situations, send the heat, get pressure. That's going to be the big thing that I think North Rockland will at least attempt to do for this game.
Yeah, my matchup, I'm looking at North Rockland's offensive line versus Arlington's defensive line, to me is the most intriguing. Let's go to the game of the week, Mars. John J. East Fishkill 1-0 at Marmaroneck, who's 1-0. This is a league game. John J. East Fishkill last week won versus Brave. Marmaroneck won versus Ossining. And historically, John J. East Fishkill is 4-0 versus Marmaroneck. But the last time they played, 2015. It's been 7 years. Time really does fly. But let's talk about John J. Mars. Offensively, I was very impressed with them last week. 51 points they scored. And it starts with their quarterback, Feliciano. 5 touchdowns last week, 2 passing, 3 rushing. He had over 200 yards total offense. The guy in the red zone, they knew who they were going to, and that was Feliciano, and he delivered. But another guy to keep an eye on, and John J. Fishkill talked about him a bunch in articles, and even to me, their wide receiver, Dante Mondial. I apologize if I didn't say his name right, but he had 108 all-purpose yards. He had 2 touchdowns. One of them was rushing the ball. Jack Hurley had a 17-yard touchdown. They want to create matchups and get these guys in space, and they do a heavy reliance on their quarterback. And he is a good athlete, dual-threat quarterback in Feliciano, and he's got some weapons. And I thought this offensive line has, they did a good job last week, but this is, in my opinion, a step up in fronts from what they saw last week. So this is going to be a new test You're going to see a bigger front. You're going to see a more active front. And I'm expecting to see, some quick games here and some John J. East Fishkill specialties, which is screens. You saw it a couple times last week. They're one of the better screen teams in the section. Obviously, that is a Walsh specialty as well. So I'm expecting to see some screens mixed in there to kind of counteract an aggressive front of Marmaroneck. This offense is pretty impressive. Defensively, again, you're up against an offense that can hurt you in multiple ways. And I think this linebacker crew, I really like them in Crouch and Vanderstuff, are going to have to be very active. Martini had a strong game last week, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. And one of the big things they're going to have to do, they're going to have to be formidable because Marmaroneck, they have a lot of weapons on the outside, but they also have a deadly rush attack, right? So what do you want to take away? And in my opinion, again, if you believe in your linebackers and you believe in your front, you might want to kind of put your resources to kind of take away the weapons on the outside and try to trust those guys can win with maybe non-favorable numbers. So I'm interested to see what John J. Fishkill kind of decides here because Marmaroneck, again, they have multiple guys who can hurt you, right? So they can pass it, they can run it. What do you want to take away? It's hard to take away both, but you got to rely on a group to kind of win when the numbers aren't favorable. And I think their front seven is something that they can rely on right now, in my opinion. But Mars, what are your thoughts on John Jay?
Yeah, I feel like I was surprised of how many points they scored last week. 51 points is obviously just crazy. But yeah, I think that you have weapons on this John G. Fishkill team. Feliciano was absolutely just impressive. He was just dominant. And I really think you have guys that can really make big plays. You get them in the open, you get them in space. They will make the big plays for you, and obviously this offense just looks like they are high-powered and ready to go. Defensively, I think they will be tested because Marmaroneck also has a high-powered offense or a lot of weapons. So I think that, I agree with you. I think the front seven in John G. Fishkill is probably one of the better components of this defense. So I think I do agree. Try to really, they need to make a big play. They need to be stout, and then you're just going to have to rely on your secondary to now step up, right, even when the front seven does provide some pressure. So it's going to be interesting to see what John J. Fishkill does. Yeah,
let's go to Marmaroneck and Mars offensively. You said it, high-powered. They scored 49 points, right, last week. So, again, 2 very high-powered offenses going at it. Their quarterback obviously starts with him, Jason Cox, 10 of 15, 133 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also had 30 yards rushing. Very efficient, right? And their running back, Hamilton, he only had 8 carries, Mars, 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. And they threw touchdowns to Glinsky, Chambers, Ramsey last week. They have Obregon. I mean, these guys, they have weapons. And there's multiple different ways that they can hurt you. And to me, about Marmaroneck, they're going to get yards, right? And they're a kind of a big chunk play type of offense where they can hit a lot of big chunk plays, but can they be efficient when they get into the red zone, right? When the space gets tighter, can they be efficient, right? Because they're really good in the open field, but when things get tight, can they, again, bump and grind? Can they be efficient in the passing game? That's going to be the big question because they have the skill guys to make big plays, but can they just be efficient is going to be the big one. And I think they have an opportunity to. Defensively, listen, if Marmaroneck can play strong defense throughout the season, they're going to win a lot of games. Last week they did, right? They gave up no points. But to me, it starts up front with guys like Henry Bennett, TJ Smith, who had a sack, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Really big game from him. Glinsky had an INT. So, they have a couple different playmakers as well, but they're going to have to, again, get pressure on Feliciano, who's a game breaker. I mean, he had a really impressive first game. They rely on him a lot. He's kind of the orchestrator of that offense. So can they generate pressure on him? He's going to be a big one. Mars, what are your thoughts on Marmaroneck?
Yeah, I said before, high-powered offense. I really was impressed the way that Marmaroneck can score almost on demand, but I do agree with you. I think the fact is they need to be efficient, especially in the red zone, because you're going to play up against a solid defense with John J. Fishkill. If you don't capitalize on that, on the red zone, that 25, 30-yard area, then you're really not being as efficient as you could be. We talk about 49 points. They could even go more if they were to be as efficient. And I do agree with you. It's tougher to score in the red zone because there's only a certain amount of plays you can really hit, right? But at the end of the day, they definitely need to be a lot more efficient here. Defensively, yeah, they played well. And the question is going to be, can they play to the same level as they did last week against a more powerful, more explosive John G. Fishkill offense? If they can, end, and I think they're going to get a lot of opportunities on offense, and that would be more in their favor. But obviously, it's just they need to try to get their offense back on the field as fast as possible. Cause some turnovers, bring some pressure. It's doable.
Yeah, Mars, I have two keys to the game to keep an eye on for this one. And my first one is turnovers. Obviously, teams who usually win the turnover battle, especially in high school, they usually win the game. And obviously, so whatever team wins that turnover battle, the other team creating turnovers, giving their offense, who both high-powered offenses, more possessions is going to be key in this one. And my second one, chunk plays. Both these teams have the athletes to hit big chunk plays. When I call chunk plays, 20-plus yarders, right? Both these teams have the athletes to do it. Both these teams can do kind of that track race type of day. Which one's going to have the most is going to be my big question I'm wondering at the end of this one. Mars, any thoughts before we go to the matchup?
Yeah, I just feel like both these offenses have ability to just score high points. I think the question is going to be which defense steps up, right? I think that will be who kind of declares the winner for this game.
Yeah, and to me, the matchup, I'm looking at these two quarterbacks versus the opposing defense. Mars Feliciano, again, 5 touchdowns cocked, was really efficient last week. These two offensive quarterbacks, I'm excited to see kind of what they bring to the table this weekend. And my player to watch, Dante Mandiel, the John Jay's Fishkill wide receiver. They say he's one of their best athletes, a big play guy, and on a field full of big play guys, which one is going to shine? Keep an eye on Dante. All right, Mars, those were the breakdowns. Now let's go to the game picks. And I don't want to brag or anything, but last week I went 6-0. 6-0 last week for me. Mars and Lohud went 6-1. So you guys really good. I mean, I think everyone did pretty darn good, but I did put up that 6-0, loss, which is, but again, it's by the end of the season, we'll see. But a couple bragging rights right now. But let's get to the game picks. Mars having a little bit of fun. Carmel 1-0 at Yonkers Forest, who's 2-0. I will not pick this game, but Mars, who do you have winning and why?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Carmel. I think the fact that, Carmel had such a big game last week does give them the advantage. I think Yonkers Forest has has a solid offense. I just think Carmel just has more momentum on their side. Their defense is really what sets them apart, and they just have, I think, more bodies and just more strength that they can move people around, especially with their rush offense. I just think Carmel's going to win here.
Let's go to the next game, Mark. Scarsdale 1-0 at Ossining, who's 1-1. This is a league game. When I look at both these teams are going to try to run the ball. Scarsdale running the option, Ossining running the wing tee. Heavy run. I'm interested to see who's going to hit a couple pass plays on this and who gets to the outside more, I think wins this game. And I think it's going to be Scarsdale. Again, I think when you look at both these teams, a bunch of talent, there's talented players on both teams, but Kobe Baldwin to me is the X factor, and he's probably the best player on the field. And when things are kind of close with the rest of the guys, I tend to lean towards who's got the best player. And to me, it's Scarsdale. I'm going to go with Scarsdale.
I'm also going to agree. I'm going to go Scarsdale. I just think they have more talent overall. I think, obviously, Ossining has some really impressive players, too, but I think Scarsdale just has too much, and I think they're going to win here. I'm going Scarsdale.
Mount Vernon 0-1 at RCK, who's also 0-1. This is a league game, and when I watched RCK, there's a lot of inexperience out on that field, and you saw that inexperience last week. Dean Fitzsimons, though, he had a passing touchdown. Martinez had a receiving touchdown. You saw some good things from RCK, and when I look at Mount Vernon, Mars, they were close for a half last week versus North Rockland. I mean, there were multiple times that they got into North Rockland's red zone, and they were stopped. And guys like Jaden Hamilton, he had 64 yards rushing. Forster had 42 yards rushing. Mount Vernon has some speed. Can they hold up front? This one was a tough one for me to pick, but I'm actually to go with Mount Vernon on the road. I think, again, that speed, we saw the Yonkers Force was able to hit some big plays versus RCK using their speed, and I think Mount Vernon also has a similar opportunity. The question to me is, can Mount Vernon be more disciplined enough up front? I think there'll be enough. I think this game will be close, but I'm going Mount Vernon.
I'm going to agree. I think Mount Vernon is going to win this game. I think they do have some weapons. They have a lot of speed in the as their weapons, and I think if you get them in space, they can cause some havoc. I'm going to go with Mount Vernon.
White Plains 0-1 at Suffern, who's 0-1. This is a non-league game. But Mars, two of these teams trying to rebound. And when I look again, White Plains also has a lot of young faces. They do have some weapons, guys like Graham, and their passing tech was pretty solid. I liked some of the stuff I saw, getting their guys in space. And Suffern, again, it's got to be disappointing that some of the drive killers of snaps going on was an absolute killer for them. Turnovers, fumbles, it was tough. And now they have a quick turnaround, Mars. Monday, playing on Friday. You only have a couple days to get ready to rebound. But I'm still going to go with Suffern. I think, again, Suffern has a bunch of talent on their team, and I think they're going to try to run and use their strength and size. I think the game plan kind of gets squeezed down because of the limited time, allows them to focus. I think Suffern is going to win this game, but don't be surprised if it's the close one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Suffern too. I think they do have the size advantage for this game, and I think that they will use that to their benefit. They're going to get a lot of run plays in, and I think they're going to try to throw out a lot of different types of formations and ways to hit you from. I'm going to go with Suffern, and I think they're going to win here.
Next game, New Rochelle 1-1 at Yonkers Brave, who's 0-2. New Rochelle trying to bounce back from their loss against Carmel. It was a very physical game versus Carmel. Both teams got a little beat up. Interested to see how New Rochelle is health-wise. And Yonkers Brave, again, in a new offensive scheme, trying to figure out their offensive identity, trying to be more efficient. I think this is a tough task for Yonkers Brave. I'm going with New Rochelle. I think Luzzy is going to have a really good game. He's been really efficient. Even when he faced a lot of pressure versus Carmel, he still made some really nice throws. So I think he's going to, again, lead this offense, and they're going to have an easier time running the football this time around. I'm going to go with New Rochelle.
I'm also going to go New Rochelle. I think they have a lot of talent. I think that Luzzy showed a lot of promise. He had a lot of big plays. I just think that they are playing a team that they can move around more on. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. They're going to be able to pass the ball. I'm going Neuro here.
Arlington 1-1 at North Rockland, who's 1-1. This one was a really tough one for me. I think North Rockland, again, started off slow, picked it up in the second half. Consistency is kind of the big word for North Rockland. They're not small, right? Arlington will be bigger than them, but they're not a small team. And I think they're going to, again, use kind of the spread, use the tempo, use kind of the motions and shifts to kind of benefit them and create some opportunities. They're going to have to hit some plays in the passing game. But I'm going to go with Arlington, Mars. I think Arlington, again, we saw this last year when they kind of took off, finding their identity and formula and running downhill, using their size and these backs, continuing to run hard, and Resigno kind of being their spark plug, running the football and then play action as a complement to that. I think Arlington, that formula is a winning formula, and I think they continue that this week. This game will be close because Arlington has a quick turnaround too. They started Monday. Now, the good news is it's a Saturday game, right? So they get that extra day, which benefits them. I'm going to go with Arlington in a close one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Arlington too. I think that they have the size advantage, which gives them more of the benefit of the doubt here. I think I agree with you. When they stick to their formula of running downhill and it opens up a lot of the other facets, that's when they win most, or that's when they dominate most, and I think they will do that again. I'm going Arlington.
Game of the week, Mars. John Jay's Fishkill 1-0 at Marmaroneck, who's also 1-0. Big league game. Who do you got winning and why?
Yeah, see, this is going to be a really tough one. I think both teams have really good offenses. I think that they, each have their own, quirks about them. Nearly scoring identical points, right? John G's Fishkill has a lot of talent on the offense. They have a lot of skill players that can make big plays, and obviously, getting their guys into space will hurt defenses. And from the defensive point of view, they're gonna be tested. I think their front is definitely gonna be tested because they're gonna have to be or really make big plays to really contain these skill players that Marmaroneck has. And the same thing from Marmaroneck's point of view. Offensively, I think they have a lot of weapons too, and I think that they just need to be more efficient in the red zone. If they were, then I think they would make even bigger plays than before. Defensively, they're gonna really step it up big time with their pass rush, and I think if they do that, they can win this game. And I'm going to go with Marmaroneck. I think they're playing at home. They're going to play, in a really tough, tough route here. I think John Jay's Fishkill is very impressive. It's going to be a shootout. But I think what's going to happen is Marmaroneck is going to step it up in the end. And I think that they will capitalize on the red zone more often, which gives them the advantage. And I think the front is going to cause some issues for John Jay's Fishkill. I'm going with Marmaroneck.
Listen, you made a lot of good points there, and when I look at these two teams, I agree with you. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I do think these two teams are going to hit some big plays. The question is which defense is going to step up, right? I do love the linebacking core of John Jay's Fishkill, but I agree with you, Mars. I'm going with Marmaroneck. They got to go into the jungle in Marmaroneck and win that game at that home stadium, and that place is going to be rocking. And Marmaroneck's their offense, although very high-powered, right? They seem to be exceptionally high power at home. So it's going to be a tough task. But again, don't be surprised because John Jay's Fishkill with the coaching staff that they have, this feels like a game that John J. Fishkill could pull off, which will send a ripple effect in Section 1. But I do think Marmaroneck, we talked about them before the preseason started. Marmaroneck, to me, could be a team that is reckoned with. And I'm going to go with Marmaroneck to win this game, and an important one. All right, everyone, that was our show. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Please enjoy this weekend's games. Make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe for future content to help the channel. Thank you guys again for watching, and we'll see you all very soon.